This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to Roots and All. This end of year episode is a little different. Instead of me asking the questions, I'm handing the reins over to top-notch gardener Kelly Baldry, who turns the microphone back on me. We talk about the making of the podcast, changing our minds, travel and climate guilt, and the realities of horticulture as a tool for mental health rather than a cure-all. We also dig a bit deeper into my work at Veterans Growth and what it really means to create safe spaces in and beyond the garden. I hope you enjoy listening.
Let's start with the first question. When you were interviewed by one of your listeners, Joanne, a few years ago, you said that was a one-off, not to be repeated event. But here we are again, and this time I'm asking the questions. So what made you change your mind and decide to be interviewed again?
Well, you asked me, and I'm not one to say no. I'm always up for anything. Yeah, did I say it was not going to happen again? I mean, probably because I really don't like doing it, and I don't like the sound of my own voice, and I quite often have imposter syndrome. So I'm like, oh God, I've got nothing to say. I just prefer interviewing people and then, let them share their wisdom. So that was probably where that came from. So I don't know how much knowledge and wisdom I'm going to be able to impart, but it's the last episode of the year. So I'm sure I can have a bit of fun with it. You never know.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Well, I thought it would just be nice for people to find out a little bit more about you, about Sarah, and about the host and what goes on behind the scenes, really. So that was why I suggested it. So, okay, well, yeah, you changed your mind on the being interviewed, and I changed my mind on lots of things, actually, horticulturally and in my personal life as well. But horticulture, I've changed a lot of my opinions after going to symposiums like Beth Chatto and Talking Plants. Are you ever tempted to go back into old podcasts and edit them again when you learn something new or change your opinion, especially if it's on a subject you feel strongly about? Or maybe even delete a podcast from the library if you said things in the past and you've changed your mind?
Oh, that's a good question. I have been tempted to delete them from people who've gone down in my estimation, but I feel like that's not really my job. The podcasts are there in effect until the show stops, until maybe the internet breaks, whatever. They're going to stand. And I think they're a bit of the historical record. So I've had people who've been on the podcast who've passed away, and I love the fact that I've captured their voices and they'll stay there for as long as I can, make that happen. And I think the world changes, our opinions change, certainly mine changes like the weather. So if I took out everything that I changed my mind on, there'd probably be nothing left. I'm quite principled, I think, and got quite strong values, but I'm never, ever afraid to change my opinion. And I like to think that the people that listen don't take everything as read, that they listen and make their own judgments based on it. So quite often I'll play devil's advocate, and I might interview somebody who I don't agree with, and I'll listen to them, and I might challenge them sometimes, but I generally think, no, let that stand, because it's important. It's not my opinion that matters, and I might think a lot of things behind the scenes, but I wouldn't edit to that extent. So no, what's gone before stays, and I'm happy with that.
Okay. I guess it's a bit of a sort of a conflict in a sense, isn't it? Because if someone jumps into an old podcast where we've said something, say 10 years ago, and then we've changed our mind, they could get the wrong impression. But on the other hand, it is a journey, isn't it? And we're all on that journey.
Yeah, and I like to think that they'll look at the release date, and nothing's ever set in stone. I'm a big believer in the fact that we think that we're right now and that we're on the right path, and many things will come along to knock your legs out and make you think, actually, was what I was doing 15 years ago actually the right thing? And do I have all the answers now? Well, I might think I do, but I'm pretty sure I don't. And so I think that it's still valid information. And if nothing else, then for part of the historical record to say, well, that's how we used to do things. That's how things were accepted. And I think that's of interest.
No, it's very true. Yeah, I agree with that. And you've made hundreds of podcasts and collected, as you said, lots of different opinions across the horticultural world, lots of different voices, which is why they are so good to listen to. How long does it take to produce each podcast? And do you ever know how many people actually listen to them?
I do know how many people listen to them, yeah, but I'm too tight to pay for upgraded statistics on Libsyn, so I know what I know. So every month gets around about 20,000 downloads, and that's across all episodes, but the majority of those come from the newer ones. And I know which one's the most popular for that year, for example. I haven't looked this year, so I don't know that, but last year on Instagram I ranked the top ones. So, there's that. I do have a rough idea of how many people are listening, although some of the stats don't get recorded because they're on other platforms that don't factor into the Libsyn stats. So it's a bit of a kind of how long's a piece of string. Like I said, if I paid for some all singing, all dancing thing, I'd probably know more, but I don't slavishly look at the figures. I just think this is what I'm doing. And I know people listening because I went to New York a while back and I spoke to a gardener who was just working in the garden, and she said, "Oh, I think I was just listening to your podcast." So, oh, that's very weird. So people are listening across the world. So I'm happy if one person listened and it helped them, I'd still do it, honestly. But what was the other bit of that question that you asked me?
Yeah, how long does it take to produce each podcast?
So if I have a book to read, then obviously there's that I factor in. And quite often there is a book that I'll read, or I'll do some research on a guest. And that can take however long it takes to read a book. I'm quite a quick reader, thankfully. Otherwise, it's literally just I make a note of the questions as I'm researching or as I'm reading. So I just have them in front of me, and then it's literally 30 minutes and then we're done. And then I download the audio, send it over to lovely editor Pete, and he sorts it all out, pings it back to me, and then I just upload it with the show notes and stuff. So people say to me, "Oh, it must be a lot of work," but I've got it down to a fine art now, so it's not really a huge amount of time. I'd love to say, "Oh God, it takes me days," but I'm not that much of a perfectionist either. I'm just like, right, it's done, it's fine, it's good enough, out it goes. And so it's actually relatively easy.
Okay. I think that's a really impressive, sort of downloads and listening figures. That's just fantastic. With that, you recently put out a post saying, "As Sarah, what would you pay me to do?" And I think a lot of people responded, myself included, and said how much they valued the podcast and just said, well, keep doing what you're doing. So you obviously got some nice replies. But aside from that, did you get the answer you were looking for from asking that question?
I probably did, although the tricky thing with podcasting, and I love doing it, obviously I love doing it, or I wouldn't keep doing it, because I've changed, like I said, like the weather. So if I get bored of something, then I'll stop doing it. And, I might throw myself into it for a couple of years and then completely pivot and go, "Oh, I'm never doing that again. I'm going to try something else." So obviously I have stuck at this and it does interest me. The tricky thing with podcasting is that you don't tend to make any money out of it. So lovely people subscribe to me on Patreon, but not enough for me to jack in my real job and do it full time. But I suppose I did and I didn't. I was expecting someone to have a lovely wand and go, "Yeah, I'd pay you all this money to do that." And like you said, I did get really lovely responses, and I was like, oh God, I was really grateful, because I suppose it confirmed maybe what I already knew, which is that people do like the podcast and that they want me to carry on doing it. But I wasn't fishing for compliments. It was genuinely, what would you pay me to do? Because I don't often know where my value is in the world, really, I suppose. I do a lot of things and a lot of things that I'm proud of, but I don't know if I'm always giving the best value as a human being, not as a commodity, not in terms of, like, what would you pay me to do? Would you give me like £500 and I'll come around and clean your house, sort of thing? It was more about what's the value that I'm adding here. And I think that I probably, like I said, already knew that it was the information thing. What I didn't then do was expand upon that and say, right, well, okay, if that's what my value is, then I'm going to take this path. I'm always one of those people that's looking for another thing to do. I'm ambitious, but not in a sense of I want to earn millions and millions of pounds. It's more like, what can I do next to make a change? And yeah, I'm still not settled on that.
Yeah, to make a sort of a worthwhile contribution, really, and to feel that you are doing. In that sense, did you get any unexpected answers that made you reevaluate what you're doing, or point in maybe a different direction forwards?
No, I suppose I didn't. And I'm always searching, always. I'm just one of them people that's naturally like antsy And I'm always like, right, what can I be doing better? What can I do now? What can I do that's bigger and better? And some people that I know, I went around their house and they whipped out the tarot cards and they said, ask a question. And I think my question was something like, what should I do next? And the tarot cards, according to them, said, oh, well, you're exactly where you should be and you're doing exactly the thing that you should be doing. And that's the story of my life. Like, I probably am doing what I should be doing. It's just that in my brain, it's always this little itch that goes, right, what are you doing now? What can you do more of? What can you do better?
Okay. So when I asked you about doing this interview, I said, can I ask you challenging questions? And you said yes. So here's one of those questions. One of the podcast interviews you did recently came from a visit to the High Line in New York. As gardeners, we know that climate change is accelerating and it's being caused primarily by emissions from burning fossil fuels. So I'm wondering, if you visit a garden overseas and that visit comes with a lot of carbon emissions, how are you squaring that circle?
For me, I feel it's a very dangerous thing to blame individuals for climate change. And I'm always a little bit wary when people point the finger and say, oh, well, you've done this holiday or you've done this flight. Therefore, you need to be mindful of your carbon emissions. And I know, obviously, I am. And I would certainly reduce visits for, if it was a work meeting, I would always do it online if I could. And there's loads and loads of things I do, like, so I eat a plant-based diet. One of the big things that I do, and actually I'm not going to quote who says this, but somebody that I know very well who travels a lot said, well, I don't have any children. And I don't have any children. And so I'm not justifying my actions, but I'm certainly mindful that there's lots of things that I do that aren't good for the planet. And so I don't beat myself up if I go on holiday and I do a podcast interview while I'm there. There's lots and lots of things that I do good. So if I do something that's not so good in terms of the climate, I can sleep at night. I'm all right with that.
I think that's a good answer because it's looking at the whole thing in context, isn't it? And I'm like you, no children. So, yeah.
Well, and also, like, travel is important, I think, as a cultural exchange. And of all the things I could cut down on, that's not going to be one of them that I do lightly.
Well, I actually enjoyed that interview that you did with Richard Hayden because I've always followed the progress of the High Line. I think as a concept, a novel ecosystem, that's just absolutely brilliant.
Yes. And I've been before and, it didn't disappoint. It is an amazing thing to see.
So changing the subject a bit, in your previous interviews, you've only briefly mentioned the work you do with the charity Veterans Growth, where you are the CEO, I believe. Could you tell me a bit more about what you do there and what the charity hopes to achieve?
So I am probably like chief cook and bottle washer. I do everything from the fundraising to the board reports to public speaking to overseeing the programs that we deliver. And then I also go in the kitchen and make gingerbread dough and clean the toilets as and when needed. So it's a role of I'll do whatever needs doing. I've got an incredible team who have over the years knitted together, and we're now quite a force. And I always say it's like a well-oiled machine. If I wasn't here, and I wasn't here for a bit when I wasn't that well earlier in the year, and so they just picked the reins up and just made it happen. Everybody is here because they're really good at what they do. And so we've got this fantastic place where people can come and they'll do horticultural therapy or they'll do outdoor activities. We have a lot of volunteers who make it happen. And it's basically for mental health and well-being. And it does seem to work. I think together we've created this lovely place, and a word that's often used amongst our clients is that it's a safe space, and it's very calm, and we try and keep it all very kind of low-key and happy, and, everybody's on an even keel. And like I said, feels safe. I think that's a really, really important thing. In terms of going forward, I won't be here forever. I envisage myself handing over to somebody else who's got another vision for it, wants to take it forward. I think I've done a good job, I hope, of sort of consolidating the position that we had and expanding it. And yeah, everybody says to me always, it must be really rewarding. And it isn't, because we don't often take the time to step back and go, oh, wow, we've done an amazing job. But then just occasionally somebody will come in and say, you literally saved my life. I would not be here if it wasn't for you. And I think those are the times that we go, okay, well, that's the importance of it. And so, because we're all running around frantically trying to get it all done in a day, we don't stop and think. But when we do, we realise actually what a huge change it's made to people's lives, which it is rewarding. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that question because I have a sort of a personal interest in this, really, because following my own diagnosis of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, I understand completely what you're saying about the safe space. And for a couple of years, I just naturally gravitated towards gardens that I felt safe in. And it meant that I actually neglected some of my other clients who were a bit more difficult or a bit further away or a bit more challenging. And for a couple of years, I just really stuck in those gardens where I knew I was okay with the work, and I knew there'd be people around, and I knew there'd be people to talk to. And somehow that just kind of set the scene to start a process of recovery. So, I completely understand what you're saying there. You said about making it work. And I think my final question here really is, we know that nature cannot heal us in itself, and trauma, especially PTSD, can only be healed by long-term support and counselling, and I've experienced this myself. So how do you think that horticultural therapy helps with trauma and mental health?
I think it helps. This is a thing that I'm bouncing around in my head at the moment. And actually, there's going to be an episode coming up in the new year where I do talk about how horticulture actually isn't a panacea. And I think that we're slightly in danger of thinking that just because you're outdoors, you're feeling better. And I would challenge that from my own experience and from experiences at work. It's something that I'm very much playing around with, because I'm not sure I know how I feel about it. I mean, like you, there was a garden that I used to go to when I was working, and it was after my partner at the time had his stroke, and I was really low, and there was a garden I'd go to, and it was a beautiful garden, lovely, great big house, really nice people. But I would go there, and every time I would burst into tears. And there was something that just didn't sit right about the job that I was doing, about the garden itself. There was something not right. And I did, in the end, give up doing it. So that kind of experience makes me think that, yeah, no, it isn't all green spaces that are good or necessarily have positive impacts on the person or the individual who's experiencing it. So there's something that we probably haven't quite quantified yet in terms of how space can affect people. There is a lot of research that's gone into it. But again, it's so individual. You can read a lot of books about designing a therapy garden, and they'll say, oh, you have to have a space where people can sit with their back and feel enclosed. Well, actually, the site that we have is very open. And that works, so I challenge that. And I think it's very much about the individual. But what we do, or we really try and do, is have a chat with a person and monitor them, whether that's just their kind of physical body language cues or what they've said to us, the things they've fed back to us. And we'll try and harness the things that they like and try and minimize the things they don't like. And that's different for everyone. So I think why we work as a charity is because we treat people as individuals, and we don't have this blanket approach to horticultural therapy and say, well, this works for all military veterans, because it doesn't. Everybody has their own thing that triggers them, has their own thing that they enjoy. And we just try and work with that person to make sure they're doing the things they like and make sure that they're avoiding anything they don't like, to a degree. But also even that is nuanced, because I know for me, when I was at my really low phase, what I would do was go into a garden and stick my headphones in and listen to podcasts all day. And I did not want to socialise. And there were other people that I was working with at the time. I just wasn't interested. I just was shutting off. And I probably in that moment needed to possibly work with people now and then, so that I had to kind of chat, because maybe I needed that healing of the conversation, and I wasn't getting it because I was indulging that thing that my brain was going, which was just shut off, don't listen, just go into yourself. And maybe that wasn't that healthy. So sometimes you have to tread a fine line between sort of facilitating behaviour that's not maybe that beneficial in the long run and challenging that, but making sure that person still feels safe. So it's very individual, and it takes a lot of experience, I think, to know how to get the best out of a person and what they need and what they want. So it's tricky though. Like I said, there's this tendency now to say, oh, everybody get out in the garden and you'll feel happy. Well, no, that's not true, actually, for some people. The garden isn't enough. The green space isn't enough. It might help, but it isn't everything that we're holding it up to be. And I think we need to just tread carefully a little bit with that point of view.
I completely agree with everything you've said there, really, and it being about the individual and what people feel comfortable with in that moment. And that changes then as well. And yeah, I don't think it is nature as such, but I think what it can do is it can help to bring you into a calm space. Because very often with trauma, the person that is the trauma person, has taken over from the person that is the calm person. And that's when you're getting triggered, and that's causing problems in your social world, your relationships, just generally your interactions with people and with life. And somehow you have to find a space, a safe space, where you can make that calm person, or enable that calm person to reassert themselves, to start taking control and overcoming that trauma person. And it's about seeing that possibility actually some of the time, and just coming into a slightly calmer, safer space, and then working with a skilled therapist at the same time. And then you suddenly start to get moments of calm. And I think then you realize and understand that there can be moments of calm, and you hold on to those and build on them. And you see that there is the possibility of something different. And there is the possibility of that calm person reasserting itself that was probably already there and there before the trauma. And that makes you think, well, there's a glimmer there of a different life, and I can see the possibility of a calm life and a different life that isn't a trauma life, and where I'm not being triggered all the time. And I think that's where the horticulture comes in. And I think there's a second stage beyond that as well. It can make you notice progress and change that has already occurred, and progress that you've already had. And for me, it was actually starting to really notice things in nature and start to be inquisitive and curious about them. And instead of just thinking, oh yeah, there's some, solitary bees that have dug little holes, I'd be thinking, well, hold on a minute, what's their life cycle? Let's put one of these on the end of my finger and take a photograph of it, catching a fly, and then post that on like social media so other people can enjoy that as well. And then all of a sudden you realize you've kind of got wrapped up in that little moment that you wouldn't have been able to notice before if you weren't coming into that calmer space. And I think that's where the horticultural therapy can work on those two things. It can bring you into a bit of a space to help facilitate the change, and it can help you notice and make you aware of changes that already happened. And then you get your own encouragement and feedback from that as well.
Yeah, I mean, the soft fascination aspect of it is important, but that doesn't come to everyone, I don't think. Or if it does, it doesn't necessarily, involve the garden as such. It might be, another aspect of just being here. And for some people, their safe space is indoors. That's kind of where they want to be. And that's interesting to me because it's not what I expected, I suppose, when I came into this with no experience. But every day is a learning curve, I think.
Yeah, and you're right. It can be the social interactions or just having some people there to talk to if you choose to. And I think, again, that's where everyone is individual. And it's important to have that range of things that someone can, just feel that they can pick something out of, and to help with that healing process.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's exactly that. You've got the choice. For example, we had a group here on Thursday and everybody went for a tea break. And tea break here is really, it's a real core activity, and everybody loves tea break and everyone likes to sit around and chat. Even people who I would not expect to enjoy that situation, they do actually a lot of the time. But there was one person who took themselves off into the garden just to have a break. And so they obviously felt that they could do that. They had the freedom to do that. And that was the choice of it. That's what made them feel safe, was that they weren't obligated to do anything.
Exactly. And that in itself is valuable, actually, because it's enabling people to see they do have choices and that there is the possibility of different.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
Well, I think our half hour's up and I've come to the end of my questions. So I'm just going to say thank you, Sarah, for letting me take your place tonight, for answering my questions. And to everyone listening, I'd like to wish you a happy winter solstice as we look forward with hope and anticipation to all the good things we're going to do in our gardens and spaces we care for in the coming year. And thank you for listening.
My thanks to Kelly for such a thoughtful interview, and to you for listening and supporting Roots and All throughout 2025. Happy Christmas. This will be the last episode until mid-January, while I take a short break. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.